I'm back. Okay, so get this, right? If you watch my videos, you know me by now. I'm just not one to sit around and say, um, it's the Illuminati, you know. Um, I myself, I feel like, all right, once you hear the name of Illuminati, now we need to know who's actually a part of the Illuminati and stuff like that, right? So I'll never sit around and say, "Oh, the Illuminati wants this." No, give me names. Give me the names of the people on the Bilderberg. You know what I'm saying? So, when I quote the Bilderberg, I can actually tell you who's a part of it. For instance, like when I found out the owner of the New York Jets is in on, all out of this crap, then it makes sense why the New York Jets always suck. He's worried about important stuff than football. Football's just a distraction. Um, so that's how I am. So when everyone just says, "Oh, the white man did this, the white man did that," well, I mean, me with the newfound knowledge, I'm like, no, well, because technically, white has nothing to do with skin color. This is was it uh, um, a representation of us standing in law, with the same title as the blameless Ethiopians. You know, free white had nothing to do with skin color. It had to do with your righteous standings, or your how would you put it? You being justified and just in the public point of view. You know, black had been that you were deceitful. You were untrustworthy, things like that. Um, Spent a lot of time talking to a friend of mine that explains that she's a Moorish, so she has gone through and filled out her free white status once she claimed her nationality. So she told me that has a lot to do with law. So we sit down and talk back and forth in dialogue. So when I hear, it's just the white man did this, the white man did that, I sit around and I actually think, all right, so who and what is the white man, And you learn about stuff. You learn about what was it, manifest destiny, which that's what Lex really brought to really brought out when I first started watching his videos. He was really hammering out the manifest destiny and how we weren't really paying attention to it. And what was the other thing that they did? The religious segregation. Can't think of the name of it. Apartheid. So I started sitting back and thinking, all right, so who's taught these men this? Who gives these men the right and the ideas to do this? And from what I'm finding, it all goes back to the Persians. The Persian Zohar is what I first came across, but then I found out the Talmud is actually worse than the Zohar. So I just want you to check this out. Listen to this, all right? Maybe it was better this.
In the Talmud, in Treatise Sanhedrin, an extensive passage describes the right of the Pharisee to kill anyone, just as long as he did so indirectly. As one of dozens of examples, the Talmud tells us that if one bound his neighbor and he died of starvation, he is not liable to execution. In such an indirect manner, the Pharisees also killed Christ. Manipulating the Romans to actually wield the spear and sword, the Pharisees claimed, as their descendants do today, that since the Romans were the direct cause of the death of Christ, it is the Romans, not the Jews, who are guilty.
Now, starting off right there, takes you back to the slave trade, and when Lex did the video breaking down that brother from Europe, from England there, that spoke about the Jewish involvement that people don't talk about. Think about that for a moment, right? He already gave us a mouthful of the way that the Persians or the so-called Jews of today, started up the slave trade, really got it going. And we don't hear about that. We just hear the white man. We hear about that white man down south, which I'm not, believe me, I'm not saying that they had nothing to do with this. They're completely responsible for it. What I'm saying is, you can see that right there when you start to sit back and think about the manipulations, because we don't hear about the Jewish involvement. We just hear about, the white man and what he did.
Christ also called the Pharisees adulterers, an adulterous generation. The Talmud provides generous loopholes for adultery. It says the penalty for adultery does not include sex with a minor, the wife of a minor, or the wife of a heathen. The Talmud also encourages the seduction of unwed adolescent girls called designated bondmaids. But it's important how such rapes are performed. With the designated bondmaid, one is guilty only in the case of natural connection, but not in the case of perverse connection. The Pharisees reasoned that rape in a perverted manner is outside the jurisdiction of the law.
So, perverted, I basically took that as anal. I mean, I might be wrong, because that's just not natural. So,
normal rape, however, was punishable. In Babylon, sexual perversion of every kind had been a way of life for millenniums. The Pharisees were deeply influenced by...
Now look at that. When I see that, I thought, I mean, maybe it's just the poor artwork. I thought that looks really, really Asiatic, or Asian, you know what I'm saying? Look at those eyes, look at that.
Such practices.
In 3 of the major treatises of the Talmud are found extensive passages which give legal endorsement to seduce and marry 3-year-old baby girls. In fact, many of the greatest rabbis of the Talmud, including Simeon ben Yochai, upheld this privilege. Today in Israel, thousands of Jews go to Meron every year to venerate the memory of Simeon ben Yochai, one of the most respected rabbis in the history of Judaism.
In one of dozens of endorsements of child sex, Simeon ben Yochai said, "A proselyte under the age of 3 years and a day is permitted to marry a priest." Agreeing with ben Yochai, the great Rabbah said, "When a grown-up man has intercourse with a little girl, it is nothing, or when the girl is less than this, 3 years and a day, it is as if one put the finger into the eye." The footnote to this passage says, "As tears come to the eye again and again, so does virginity come back to the little girl under 3 years."
And you know, when I was listening to this, I kept thinking about some of that old-time Mormon stuff that you'll read about. I came about some stuff there in my search of Abraham Lincoln, and was Abraham Lincoln a Mormon? You know, which I don't think he was, but I mean, it could be wrong. I mean, there's a speculatory situations where that he hung out with people that were Mormons, you know, and they taught him how to levitate and all this other stuff. So, but you read about some of that in the marriage laws and the sexual acts. I was like, as I'm listening to this, it kept bringing my mind back to it. I said, could you know, the Persians or the people that call themselves Jews, could they have been the ones that might have, you know, gone about teaching this, you know, to the Mormons and stuff like that?
The same section confirms that sexual activity with small boys is in the same category. The intercourse of a small boy is not regarded as a sexual act. In addition to adulterers, Christ, in the story of the Good Samaritan, portrayed the Pharisees as racial bigots, too self-righteous to respond to the suffering of one who was not a Jew. It is true, because of the wickedness of the Canaanites, which included sodomy and infant sacrifice, Israel...
And we see in that today with the whole Pizzagate. You know, with the whole Pizzagate, the whole Moloch in the pizza oven, or the oven.
Had been commanded by God to be harsh in her treatment of the...
That's what I'm talking about, like the pizza oven. See that? And then there's a guy that actually does a really good job connecting today's Pizzagate and the spy words like pie for girl, cherry pie, and Pizzagate, pizza for boy, like Pizza Planet and Toy Story. You know, they take their kid to Pizza Planet, and then the aliens. I'll share that one day.
The inhabitants of the land. God made it clear that the Canaanites were not simply to be avoided, but destroyed. By the time of the New Testament, this method of preserving God's kingdom by separation and the sword had become obsolete. God no longer made a racial difference between men.
But the Pharisees were unfazed by God's new agenda. The Talmud was finally written down nearly 5 centuries after Christ, yet its critical, even homicidal attitudes toward Gentiles might have been lifted out of the book of Joshua. However, the quickest way to grasp the Talmudic view of Gentiles is not directly from the Talmud, but from the Jewish encyclopedias. If we quote an isolated opinion from the Talmud, a rabbi may quickly object, saying, but that is not the overall opinion of the Talmud. That is not the definitive view. What the Jewish encyclopedia provides us is a definitive overview of perhaps hundreds of rabbinic statements on any subject, giving us accurate summaries of what the Talmud generally teaches.
In its article on Gentiles, the Jewish Encyclopedia begins to define what makes a Jew so different from a Gentile.
And it was crazy because my adopted father was a pastor. He didn't like to go by any of the denominations, Southern Baptist, anything like that. But he said he was a part of the what they call the Brethren, which learning about the Brethren in New York, not New York, but Pennsylvania, the Brethren were no good at all. They were part of the problem, and they were racial bigots. He always taught us when we would ask where were black people in the Bible, that we were the seed of Ham. And I remember when I first came across all this stuff about Ham and what the Mormons and the Catholic Church taught, and I went back to him, I was like, you really think this about us? He's like, no, I never taught you that. But it's just crazy, you know. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I sit back and I think it's crazy.
According to the rabbis, only Israelites are men. Gentiles they classed not as men, but as barbarians.
Like Conan.
Since Gentiles are not men in the fullest sense, so the Gentile is not a neighbor of a Jew. Further, since Gentile laws were too crude to admit of reciprocity, meaning too crude to be taken seriously, the Gentile was forever beneath the Jew. Gentiles were outlawed by God from the beginning, and thus had no property rights. The Almighty offered the Torah to the Gentile nations also, but since they refused to accept it, he withdrew his shining legal protection from them and transferred their property rights to Israel, who observed his law. Since the Talmud outlawed the child, or issue of a Gentile, as that of a beast, a Gentile had as little legal rights in a Jewish court as did an animal.
Now you hear that? That's where I was getting to. With the manifest destiny, and what was the other thing, that religious apartheid, that right there hit home. Because that reminds us of what happened to us in our legal system, in our court system, right? It makes you wonder, the whole court system, who set it up, how was it set up? It makes you really want to just go back and tear it all down and see if you find any trace of the Talmud.
The Talmud states that if a Gentile sue an Israelite, the verdict is for the defendant, the Israelite. Conversely, if the Israelite is the plaintiff, he obtains full damages. Because the Talmud
reminds us of the court systems our ancestors used to have to go through. Couldn't even have their own legal representation, had to have someone else speak for them. That wasn't even for their best interest. That was all for the party. What are they called? You're the accused. You know what I mean? Like, they just weren't for us. They were for the other side.
Conspires against Gentiles. If a Jew was ever caught telling a Gentile what the Talmud really says, such a person deserves death. So vile was the nature of a Gentile that the great Simeon ben Yochai said, "The best among the Gentiles deserves to be killed. The best of snakes ought to have its head crushed." Jews, however, are exalted beings in the Talmud, worthy of praise. Christ...
And I wonder, when it says the best of snakes, is it going back to the Nagas? Was the N-A-G-A, the Nagas?
Described the Pharisee who blessed himself, saying, "I thank thee, Lord, that I am not as other men." An eminent Talmudic rabbi says the same. "Blessed be thou, who hast not made me a Goy, or Gentile." The There is a special antagonism between the Talmud and Jesus. The Talmud attacks him everywhere it can.
I don't like
his
to
mother.
promote false images.
Mary, the Talmud says, was a whore who mated with carpenters. She who was the descendant of princes and governors played the harlot with carpenters. It naturally followed that the scribes declared Christ to be a bastard. In its article on Jesus, the Jewish Encyclopedia says that Jewish writings defame Christ. It is the tendency of all these sources to belittle the person of Jesus by ascribing to him illegitimate birth, magic, and a shameful death. Jesus, according to this article, was considered one of the three worst enemies of Judaism who came to an ignoble end. The Talmud says they subjected him to 4 deaths: stoning, burning, decapitation, and strangling. The Talmud also says he is now in hell, punished with boiling hot excrement. What is Christ's advice as he speaks to us out of hell?
All right, I think that's enough of that. But if you just pull that up and Google it, there's just tons of videos of what the Talmud and the Zohar actually have said. I mean, it's like basically when you listen to this stuff, there's one brother, he actually does like almost a 2-hour-long segment about it. And it made me just think, what is this book? It's like the walking, Bible for the clan members, like just they get deep into it. Just what it actually says, and it's a long journey. So I just wanted to share this much. If you want to check it out, check it out. I just would say, be careful and stay away from what's his name, David Duke and that crap, because I just like he ain't even objective, at all. You know what I'm saying? At all. There's still something on the topic of David Duke. I still would like to ask this: does anyone else know why the man ran for governor of Louisiana? Because that made me really uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable, because I remember listening to a interview with the security from what's that guy's name? The security from Bill Clinton when he was in office. And they had a security member in there that was explaining that when Louisiana is put under martial law, real martial law, not this, the martial law we're all under, that was the state of emergency, thanks to Teddy Roosevelt, but like a martial law that actually people have been dreading. Once Louisiana goes under that, then actually the whole entire nation is actually under martial law, even if it's just Louisiana. There's like an overthrow of Louisiana is basically what the guy was laying out, and it was something that Clinton tried to pull off back in the day. Even and I just would like to know if anyone else knows that there's something really in laws or something I could really read that would explain how that works and why they would want to go in there and overthrow it. Does it go back to the fact that the actual owner of the state of Louisiana is in fact a black Indian? I don't know how else to put it. That she owned, her and her family have proof that they can own it. So just, if you can, leave it in the comment sections. Anyways, everyone have a good night.